The new chair of the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities, Thoko Mkhwanazi-Xaluva, says she's now going to lead a process with the victims of the KwaSizabantu mission. Under its previous leadership, the CRL made findings that involved the leadership of that mission having to apologise for the way in which these victims were treated while they were children. Some of the victims are now suing the CRL Commission, saying a proper process was not followed. The victims had previously given testimony, saying they were abused by the leadership of the mission at the time. There were also claims of financial mismanagement. Mkhwanazi-Xaluva joins us now. Madam Chair, good morning to you. This has been a very, very difficult process for the victims, but also for the CRL. What kind of process do you want to follow now?
Good morning to you and your viewers. What we are saying is that we need to have a conversation with the victims, but also go back to the report. We are saying we want to review the report in terms of its findings. As the new commission was saying, we want to reopen that whole issue of whether we have a mandate or not, and how do we deal with issues of people who have been violated in a religious environment. So our take as the new commission is that we do have a mandate because it happened within a religious setting. But secondly, we need to find a comfort zone for the victims who trusted us. I might not have been there as a person, but they trusted the institution to come and unburden and tell us what actually happened to them when they were children. I do concede that things did not go well enough, and were willing to make amends and say, how do we then make it better for the victims? Because it's not a matter of who's right and who's wrong. It's a matter of there's a Chapter 9 institution that's supposed to be treating people in a particular way. When a Chapter 9 institution is being sued by the victims who are victims of a religious institution, then we know there's something very wrong there.
Could this result then in new findings against the then leadership of the mission? I mean, could it result in stronger findings against them? And I think that's what some of the victims might want.
You see, our point of departure is, it's not about what the church is doing right now. The findings were about what is happening right now in KwaSizabantu. The complainants were about what happened then when they were children. And that issue was never addressed in the report. The report only said right now, they are not a cult, they've done nothing wrong as of now. But if I say something happened in 1985, then we should focus on what happened then as opposed to now. And we feel there's a gap there that needs to be filled.
Madam Chair, I remember speaking to the chair at the time, if I recall, it was Professor David Masoma. I can't understand, and I couldn't understand then, how such decisions were made. I mean, we saw the testimony from the victims. I mean, I must say, from what you say, from what I know, it's obvious there needs to be another investigation. A review is clearly the right course here. I just don't understand how the previous leadership of the CRL got to where they got to.
Well, we are saying we're willing to reopen, but we need the cooperation from the victims. The church is, well, we won't need permission from the church because it's about what they did anyway. So if we need to subpoena them in order for them to come, we'll do that. But we need the cooperation of the victims, because right now they're suing the CRL Commission 2.5 million rands each. So we need to find a way to bring them back to the table and find an exit clause from where the situation is right now. This thing has been in court for a longish time. And I think between the previous commission and the victims, they couldn't find one another. We are saying we're willing to reopen the whole thing because we feel there's a gap in terms of what the church considered to, as to what were they doing back then. And we need to stay in the back then as opposed to the here and now.
Madam Chair, I recall when you were at the Commission before, you led an investigation into different church groups or groups that claim to be religious leaders. This is very difficult language sometimes. And some of them were involved in abuses. There were very public hearings. Are you going to continue those investigations? You in fact, seem to be suggesting that religious groups should almost police themselves, or they should police each other rather. There should be a peer review.
We are saying there should be a peer review, like you have a peer review for lawyers, for doctors, for social workers, for teachers, for everyone. You need a system that says, we want to open up a church or you want to be a religious leader, you apply first. We test if you don't have an unusual history. The peer review committee will sit down and assess each person, grant them a license to run a church, because you are exposed to children, we're exposed to women, we're exposed to everyone. Have you been checked against the register of offenders? And then they will give you the license as the peer review committee. And then if you do anything wrong, then people can come to the peer review committee and report you, or the media can report, and then there'll be an investigation. And if it's found that you are doing something wrong, that is illegal at times, they will help the victims through the system. But also you, the religious leader, will have to be suspended or fired, as the case may be, like it happens with all professions. We are saying we're relying on Section 22 of the Constitution that says you can choose your career, you can choose your profession or your trade, but you may be regulated. We are saying religious leaders are just people who chose a particular profession. They took a particular path. They are not different from a doctor who had a calling and then he became a doctor. So they'll be treated the same as any other professional.
So, Madam Commissioner, I mean, I think you and I have had this discussion before many years ago, but some of these people believe that they've been called. It's not a calling to be a doctor. They believe that they've been chosen, that they are a prophet of some kind. It becomes very difficult. I mean, there's obviously many, many cases of abuse. Think of the Umatoso case in the Eastern Cape, for example. I mean, that's a classic case. There are others like it. There's some more recently. It's very difficult for society to deal with these situations.
Society needs help. And we are saying Parliament must pass the relevant regulation, the relevant legislation that will say it's not business as usual around churches anymore. I said this over 8 years ago, whenever, but we're back because this thing then fell off the table for whatever reason. It's back on the table now, squarely, and we're going to be pushing it through. We're going to set up a Section 22 committee that will be made up of religious leaders who will help us push through the legislation in Parliament, convince parliamentarians that this thing needs to happen.
And ma'am, while we have you, if I may just also ask, the CRL Commission plays an important role in all issues of culture, and that would include initiation. And as you know, for so many years, we've had young men and boys not being properly cared for, some suffering horrendous injuries, some passing away. Are you going to be quite more activist in that area too? Are you going to be playing a role there?
We're definitely moving into that space. We are saying We were relying on the legislation being passed. 2-3 years ago, it was passed. The numbers of deaths and amputations keep rising. So the legislation is not doing what it's supposed to do. We are going to be investigating why things are not improving. You think when you pass legislation, then maybe we've covered all bases. It seems like there's still loopholes. We are going to be very activistic in this process because the minister has promised us that there's going to be a commission of inquiry that will look into this thing. We're very much in support of that process. But we're saying we're also going to be going down, especially in the Eastern Cape, to investigate what is this thing that is going so wrong, that we're losing young, fit and strong men within 2 weeks of being admitted to the initiation school. There's something extremely